you've seen the title, you know what we're doing. What is the worst thing in every Super Mario game? Can be something big, something small, but I do want to say that I've tried to strike a balance between viewing the game through the framework of when they were released, while also considering that the year is 2026 and none of us will ever be able to play these games within their original time again. Which is especially important for the games that we're gonna start this whole thing with, like the original Super Mario Bros. From a modern angle, there's a lot that doesn't hold up in Super Mario Bros. But at the same time, when you put this up against other games from the 80s, most don't even come close to this level of quality. So I'm not gonna sit here and bash the controls or the graphics or something like that. While those elements may be true through a 2026 lens, considering this game is over 40 years old, I think they're not so bad. I think that if you would go back and play this game for the first time today, you would expect them to be like that, and so you wouldn't really be let down by it, if that makes sense. So then, what would you be let down by instead? Well, one thing that even I still forget about on the rare occasion I boot up Super Mario Bros. Is how few level themes this game actually has. We all know by now the classic Mario World themes. The Ice World, the Desert World, the Grassland, the Water World, the Lava World, we can all name these with our eyes closed. And they have become such a core part of the 2D Mario experience that it suddenly feels kinda weird to go back to one of the only games to exist that doesn't have them. Suddenly, every level feels pretty similar, and while I of course understand that full-on world themes are maybe a bit too much to ask of basically the first platformer ever, the fact both the Japanese and Western Super Mario Bros. 2 released not too long after and did this significantly better makes it a fair knock against it, I think. It's hardly game-breaking, it's more so a missed opportunity, but if you view Super Mario Bros. Through the lens of when it was created, there is honestly not a lot more that you can ask of it, I would argue. And all the modern problems it has, well, I'm only gonna pick those today if they are really egregious, and I don't think they are in the original Super Mario Bros. Next up, the lost levels, and I'll keep this one short because we all know what the problem with this game is. Although, obviously the fact it is difficult is not necessarily a problem, there are plenty of games that are difficult yet a ton of fun. The Lost Levels is not one of them, and that has everything to do with how this game implements its difficulty. It's cheap, it's unfair. Too often it doesn't reward skill, but punishes lack of experience, and it's the only Super Mario game that fails at Nintendo's core focus, providing fun for its players. The Lost Levels isn't fun. It can be interesting, it can be a challenge, it can be novel, but I wouldn't say it is fun. And that has everything to do with the Kaizo-like way it implements its difficulty. Easily the worst thing about it. The Western Mario Bros. 2 is also a bit of a weird one to talk about, since it wasn't originally a Mario game, and as such doesn't really feel like a proper Mario game either. It's the only title where you can't defeat enemies by jumping on them. That always takes some getting used to. There are no power-ups whatsoever, and the pacing also feels a little different from other Mario games. But what I've always felt is the biggest tell that this isn't a Mario game, and the one that hurts my enjoyment the most is the level design. There is much more verticality going on in ways that don't really work that well. Some of the levels are so much bigger than they really need to be, to the point you can actually get lost in them, and then I haven't even mentioned that a little too many of them just flat out aren't good. Obviously, not every stage is a mess, there are some decent ones, but there are way too many that aren't fun to venture through at all or rely on weird gimmicks. And the levels that are straightforward don't even come close to weighing up to what the other 2D Marios have to offer. So in the end, none of them really hit the spot, and for a platformer that is certainly a massive problem. Okay, this is where it starts to finally get a bit harder, as we arrive at Mario Bros. 3, a game that by all accounts is incredibly impressive for the time and system it released on. In fact, in my personal experience, this is one of the few NES games that still plays perfectly fine today. Controls are pretty good, the game looks great, and it has basically every element that we have come to expect from modern Mario games. But hey, we're not here to hype this game up, we're here to talk about its biggest flaw. And I would say that for that we have to look at something more Mario games do poorly, but it stands out a lot here for one specific reason. This is one of the few things that Mario Bros. 2 did better than 3. And that's boss battles. Sure, Mario Bros. 2 makes you face off against Birdo a bunch of times, but it also had a lot of unique bosses too. In Mario Bros. 3, every boss is either Boom Boom or a Koopaling, and all those fights feel way too similar to one another, not to mention that the vast majority of them aren't challenging or all that fun. Now, like I said, that is hardly something unique to Mario Bros. 3. There are plenty more Mario games where the bosses feel underwhelming and unexciting, but this is one where it really stands out because everything else is such a severe upgrade compared to the games that came before. Well, that and there aren't many other games where you fight the same boss 15 plus times like you do Boom Boom in this game. Probably for the best that was never done again. Now, I know I have said before that I didn't want to look at these older games through too strict a modern lens, but when it comes to Super Mario Land, I'm sorry, but I can't avoid it. The controls of this game are so incredibly rough to experience in 2026 that I just cannot overlook them as the worst thing. I'm sure they did what they could on a Game Boy in 1989, but while you can prepare yourself for how short the game is, for the screen crunch and for the lack of color, there is no way that anyone going back to this isn't thrown a curveball by how stiff these controls are and how difficult Mario is to control here. People say Super Mario Bros. Is hard to control, and they're not necessarily wrong, especially by modern standards obviously, but Super Mario Land is so much worse it's not even funny. The only way you can play this today and be fine with it is if you played this a whole bunch when it was new. And if so, you might think I'm overreacting or whatever, but hey, as someone that wasn't even born when this came out, I don't have too many positive things to say about it, at least outside of the context of its release. We'll get to its sequel, which is much better, soon enough, but first we have Super Mario World, which in my eyes is an even better Super Mario Bros. 3, so this is one hell of a difficult game to tackle for this video. Just like Mario Bros. 3, it may not be as grand as some modern Mario games, but for what it is near perfection. It does very little actively wrong. But hey, there always has to be something the worst thing, even if that thing isn't remotely as important as the controls. And in the case of Super Mario World, I want to tackle my dislike for ghost houses, especially the way the game that introduced them handled them. The whole maze-like layout, which is entirely based on guessing the right path rather than actual skill, is something I've never really gelled with, and it causes the natural flow of a Mario game to potentially come to a screeching halt, but at least more recent games keep the funny business to a minimum. In Super Mario World, ghost houses are at their most confusing, and to make matters even worse, you are advised to play them multiple times, as each time you beat a ghost house, you are rewarded with an opportunity to save. One go around is bad enough, I don't need second helpings, thank you. So while it's minor stuff, not even big enough to dock a point in a review, I would say ghost houses are the worst thing about Super Mario World. Like I said, this second Mario Land game is a vast improvement over Mario Land 1, and while I wouldn't say it's as good as the 2D Marios on home consoles at the time, it's at least a fun time. The controls aren't perfect, they're a little floaty, but they're manageable. And yet, I didn't have to think too long about what the worst thing about this game is either. It's the fact you can tackle every world at the start of the game. Or, let me rephrase that, because that's actually super cool and unique, it's the fact that as a result of you being able to do that, the game lacks any form of natural difficulty curve. Every world is more or less the same level of difficulty, that is to say easy, except for the final world, which is then a gigantic step up in difficulty. Not to the point of lost levels or anything, but compared to the rest of the game, it's one hell of a spike, and it's so unnecessary too. Like, Mario games are pretty much always easy, so no one would have really batted an eye if the final world here had been as easy as the rest of the game, or they could have alternatively made levels within the worlds gradually harder, which they also didn't really do for some reason. So now, Mario Land 2 ends up being a cakewalk for far too long, only to then suddenly decide to take things seriously. We enter the 3D domain next, for Super Mario 64, which is another game I'm gonna keep it short about. For as revolutionary and still fun as this game is, there is no denying that its camera controls are rough. I never found them to actively hinder my experience, personally, but I can definitely agree with the widespread opinion that this is Mario 64's worst thing. I mean, I genuinely wouldn't know what even comes close, to be honest. Level design is still solid, and while obviously outdated, I think the graphics have a certain charm to it that you will probably appreciate even if you didn't grow up in the N64 era. When it comes to the camera, this all doesn't apply. It makes sense, sure, it was designed to work specifically with the N64 controller and its unconventional design, meaning that every re-release of it on modern consoles has felt increasingly odd to play. And while there are many things Mario 64 does much better than other games from the same era, I think this is actually not one of them. Just like Super Mario Bros. Lacked theme diversity, despite games from roughly the same time having it, Mario 64's camera controls are significantly worse than Ocarina of Time, for example, despite them being developed at the same time. It says enough that camera mods were among the first and most often used mods for Mario 64. I've never seen anyone praise this game's camera, at least not in the modern era. Next up, Mario Sunshine, which is another game that has had its flaws widely discussed in recent years, to the point I feel like there's a very sizable chunk of people who consider it the worst 3D Mario game these days. I'm not one of them, for the record, but then again, this is one of those games I played endlessly as a kid. So what I said earlier about Super Mario Land applies to me here. I can't accurately comment on how good or bad the controls or the camera are, because I am 100% used to them and have been since I was old enough to think. Fortunately, I can kinda skip over this topic, because even if you think Sunshine's controls are terrible, then you surely must still agree that they are not worse than the implementation of blue coins. I don't know what they were thinking with this, to be honest. This might just be one of the worst mechanics in a mainline Mario game ever. 240 blue coins, hidden all across the different levels, zero help or indication as to which ones you've collected, and you need all of them to 100% the game and get all shine sprites. And while getting 100% is obviously not mandatory, I do think getting all shine sprites is within the realm of reasonable 100%, if you get what I mean. It's not like Odyssey, where it feels like the game never even wants you to collect every single one. Not to mention that every single time you want to exchange your blue coins for a shine sprite, you need to visit those random raccoons at the boathouse, despite the fact blue coins offer no other purpose but to get shine sprites. So then why aren't 10 coins automatically turned into a shine sprite? It makes no sense. It just wastes your time for no reason. You're not gonna tell me that the GameCube was unable to do that. It was a bizarre mechanic all around, and it says enough Galaxy pretty much ditched every attempt at something similar. We return to the 2D plane next for the first new Super Mario Bros. Now, one interesting thing about dividing every game up like this is the fact that even though we all agree the worst thing about this series is how every game feels exactly the same, that can never really be the answer. That's not one NSMB game's fault, it's every game's fault, so it's never the worst thing about one of the individual games, if you get what I mean. So for each of them, we'll have to find a true worst thing unique to them, rather than judge it as a series like everyone always seems to do. And through that lens, NSMB for DS is actually a hard one, because this game is really well done for what it is. The graphics are shaky, but good for the system, especially early on. It plays well, it has a lot of unique and brand new elements, and it isn't low on content either. Which makes it all the more surprising that one of the biggest selling points of this game is utterly boring. I'm talking about the Mega Mushroom, which was everywhere in the marketing for this title. It was like Nintendo thought the return of 2D Mario wasn't interesting, or the fact this was a 3D game on a handheld system. No, the real reason you needed new Super Mario Bros. Was because you could become very big. And here we are, and I consider it pretty much the worst thing about it. This is such a nothing power-up, it's so boring. It essentially autoplays the level and turns it into a spectacle that never really is a spectacle. I don't know, maybe I was already too old by the time I played this and didn't consider Mario breaking warpipes cool, but I never liked grabbing a Mega Mushroom, and that is pretty much the last feeling you want to have when coming across a power-up. Onward to Mario Galaxy, which is obviously a masterpiece of a title, but I must say, it's not my favorite style of 3D Mario game, and when I replayed it for the first time in a while in the Mario All-Stars collection on Switch, I felt a little disappointed. I never realized before how much more fun I find the sandbox 3D Mario games over the more linear games like Galaxy and 3D Land and World. So while I can obviously see that Mario Galaxy is phenomenal in so many ways, it has never really been my favorite Mario game like it is for so many other people. That said, the lack of sandbox personally disappointed me, but it's certainly not the worst thing about it, that goes without saying. Similarly, despite loving my Wii back in the day, I never really fully gelled with motion controls, so especially Galaxy's pointer functionality is definitely something I would consider a lowlight, but still not enough to win this dishonorable title, which goes to another candidate for what I would call the worst Mario power-up of all time. The Spring Mushroom. I absolutely hate Spring Mario. Something about the way it moves, the rhythm of it, how hard it is to estimate how big your steps are, and how it heavily decreases your control over Mario, I really dislike it. Sure, it's barely used, it's in like what, 3 galaxies? But that's 3 galaxies too many. And today, in a world where Donkey Kong Bonanza exists, I get what they were going for, since the Snake Bonanza is essentially a spring mushroom but done right. So yeah, just like with Super Mario World, this is a bit of a minor pick, but that really just speaks to the quality of the game at hand. And we're back to New Super Mario Bros. For the Wii edition this time, and while already the tiredness of the new Soup style was starting to emerge here, I think the fact that this was a home console game as well as one with a big multiplayer focus silenced most of that criticism at the time. I mean, it did for me for sure. I loved this game a whole bunch, strongly preferred it to the DS game, it was so much fun to play with friends. But then one day, they weren't available, I don't know, and I started to play the game solo. And man, I instantly got the complaints. After decades of Mario being solely a single-player experience, it was like it became an afterthought overnight. When playing NSMB Wii single-player, it's just more or less exactly the same as the DS predecessor. There is so little innovation outside multiplayer, it's insane honestly. In fact, even when compared to the other new Super Mario Bros. Games, this probably did the least to change the experience when playing alone. All of it, from the marketing to the design focus, was on multiplayer. And while that definitely paid off, it was a ton of fun, it left single player out to dry, and that's certainly the worst thing about it. Especially when you consider that this became a trend. We continue our little back and forth between 2D and 3D with Mario Galaxy 2, which is definitely a game that has a thing or two to say about lack of originality. While certainly a strong package and a fantastic game, Mario Galaxy 2 pushed even further away from that sandbox style I talked about earlier, and so I would consider it certainly weaker than the first game in a ton of aspects. Not every aspect, and being weaker than one of the best games ever is hardly something to feel sad about, but that is how I see it. I remember playing this game for the first time and it just felt so wrong that there was a world map in my 3D Mario game. I didn't realize it at the time, but I think back then I already knew I preferred my 3D Marios open and not linear like Mario Galaxy 2 very much is. But that isn't the worst thing about it, I can separate my taste from actual quality issues. And while Mario Galaxy 2 in many ways does what Galaxy 1 already did, but more, except for the Spring Mushroom, which they wisely toned down, there is one element where I think Galaxy 2 really disappoints compared to the trio of 3D Mario games that preceded it: the hub world. Every hub world prior to Starship Mario had been large, something to explore, somewhere to test your moveset and get acquainted, something that would gradually expand. But Galaxy 2's hub world has none of that. In fact, it feels like it exists merely so it can say it has a hub world rather than actually wanting one. There is so little to do on Starship Mario and it is so small that it doesn't even remotely hit the same as Delfino Plaza or the Comet Observatory did. It can't even remotely stand beside them. At that point, you might as well not have a hub world at all, which is exactly what Mario 3D Land and World pretty much did, replacing it with a world map. And speaking of which, Mario 3D Land is next, and I'm not gonna keep it a secret, this is my least favorite 3D Mario. Not only was it even more linear than the Mario Galaxy games, essentially bringing the 2D philosophy to a 3D plane, it also felt incredibly devoid of creativity and fun themes. I know that it literally isn't, there are plenty of well-made levels in this game, but it just lacks an identity so much. The 3D Mario name comes with an expectation in terms of theming, scope and scale, and 3D Land fails to hit all of them, and that's easily the worst thing about it, I'd say. It's hard to properly, fully enjoy a game like this when you know what the series it belongs to can do, get what I mean? If this was an indie game with an original title and character and all that, we would all probably sing its praises, but 3D Mario can be, has been and would be so much more than 3D Land. And I know that is not a hot take, this is widely considered a bottom 2 3D Mario at least, so I'll keep it at this and not repeat what you might very well already think of the game yourself, but I would say the lack of scope, scale and identity is the worst thing about it, so I can't exactly forego that now, can I? You can say a lot of negative things about New Super Mario Bros. 2, but a lack of identity is not one of them. The whole get a bunch of coins idea at the very least helps set this game apart from the rest of its ultra-similar brethren. However, if there really is one thing where NSMB 2 shows it's the direct sequel to the DS original, it's having its marketing campaign focus on supposedly massive things that at the end of the day don't matter in the slightest, and if anything, bog the game down. The Mega Mushroom was boring and the focus on gold and riches for NSMB 2 is wholly unexciting as well, and if anything makes every level in the game feel the same. And if there's anything you don't want in a game with the exact same art style and world themes as the past titles, it's feeling even more the same. While I wouldn't say the focus on coins is necessarily NSMB2's worst thing, that goes a bridge too far, I would more so say that it's a lack of purpose, a lack of reason for existing beyond New Super Mario Bros. Sells well. Even though that has certainly been the motivation behind Super Mario games in the past, it has never actually felt that way until this game. It doesn't feel for a second like the developers actually had a good reason as to why this game had to exist. It feels more like they were told to make another one and just figure out something to give it a unique identity along the way. It's not like it's a bad game, but it's very much a pointless one, and that's definitely the worst thing about it. Mario games should never feel like that. Now, you could say pretty much the same thing about NSMBU, and on release day I would be inclined to agree. I think the focus on multiplayer, while not novel since Wii, does at least give it a bit more purpose, but it's really the introduction of Super Luigi U that helps give this game some unique merit compared to the other NSMB titles. And even though at this point everyone was done with this style of games, I also feel that going for the fact this is another NSMB game as the worst thing is kinda cheap. I instead want to highlight something that I think is honestly a bigger offense than that. Keeping the same art style for so many games, okay, that's very un-Mario, but it doesn't have to be a bad thing necessarily. But why the hell are we so many 2D platformers in, and still every single world theme is one we've had so many times before? Another grassland, another desert, another water world, ice, jungle, mountain, sky world, you know the drill. Is it really that hard to come up with different themes, or is it just laziness? I would really like to have seen how differently this game would be received if it had just done something completely different for its world themes. I suspect it would be viewed much better, even though it kept the art style the same, which to me is a strong indication that this is actually NSMBU's biggest problem. You can summarize it as being too much of the same thing, but this is the real root of the problem, the thing that makes everything around it feel much worse. Okay, so I was quite critical of 3D Land earlier, which might make it a bit of a surprise to hear that I actually think 3D World is a great game. Again, it's not my favorite style, 3D Mario for sure, but 3D World is nearly perfect at what it sets out to do. And the inclusion of multiplayer helps to give it an edge even Mario Galaxy doesn't have, even if I would say Mario Galaxy is the better game. But if it is nearly perfect, what is the worst thing about it then? Well, that was actually very hard to decide, and no matter where I looked, all I could find was minor stuff. Getting 100% in this game is easily the worst it has ever been in any Super Mario game, for example. In order to get the last stamps, you need to beat every level with every character, which is doable in multiplayer, but a nightmare in single player. It's not even remotely worth it, but it is necessary for 100%. The camera is also a little bit of a hindrance. Nowhere close to the days of old, but with how some levels are super rigid while others are more free, the camera isn't always up to the challenge of what each individual level asks for. I was close to picking that, very close, but if we're talking minor issues anyway, then I figured why not point out something that I actually think 3D World does worse than every other Mario game in existence. In my opinion, 3D World has the worst cover art of every Super Mario game. The transparent background is hideous, the angle of some of the background elements is extremely inconsistent and weird. Like, match these blocks with this platform, it doesn't line up. And I've always found it very weird how this cover has every playable character on it twice. Like, I get you want to show off the cat transformation that makes the game unique, but why not just remove a regular Toad and keep Cat Toad or something, if you really wanted to big free in their recognizable fits. Again, none of this really matters, but it is the one thing that really jumped out to me as to what 3D World actually does full on wrong. Ask anyone what the weakest point of Odyssey is and I feel like everyone is in agreement. No matter whether you love this game or not, everyone seems to agree that it has too many moons. Personally, I'm a little divided on the topic. On one hand, I don't think it's such a big deal until you want to 100% the game, which, like I kinda mentioned offhand earlier, I'm not sure was really intended for you to do, kinda like Koroks in Breath of the Wild. That said, I do understand seeing 3D Mario's history that people felt compelled to get every single moon. And in that light, I definitely agree there should have been less, especially since some are so boring, unnecessary and unexciting that it feels kinda pointless for them to exist. I won't call them padding or filler as many do, because I don't think that was the intention. It reminds me more of those Koroks, and how the idea there was that no matter which way you went or what you did, you would always naturally find a certain number of Koroks to expand your bag. Same here. No matter what you did or where you went, you always found a certain number of moons. But unlike Breath of the Wild, Odyssey didn't really need that. While definitely open and sandboxy, just how I like it, Odyssey's main story is pretty much linear, and you don't exactly need a tremendously large amount of moons to just push the story forward. So yeah, that creates a situation where it feels like there are too many moons for the game to realistically give away in a satisfying manner. And so, I do agree that there are too many at the end of the day. And I also agree it is the worst thing about Odyssey, but more so because the game is really, really good, and not because I think this is actually such a massive flaw. And then finally, Mario Bros. Wonder. A breath of fresh air that I'm pretty sure we all agree is really damn good, right? It's definitely not flawless though, and I didn't have to think too long to find some negative elements. The boss battles in the base game are a big letdown, and while again, they have been among the weaker elements in Mario games before, just like in Mario Bros. 3, they're such a big outlier here. In a game filled with creativity and whimsy, the bosses feel so phoned in and unoriginal, it really stands out. And another thing that definitely left me a little underwhelmed was the length of the game. 2D Mario has never really been long, but it hasn't happened to me much before that they felt too short, yet Wonder certainly did. Maybe it's because the game is pretty easy and doesn't really get hard until the absolute final level? I'm not entirely sure, but according to How Long to Beat, it's actually a little longer than the new Super Mario Bros. Games, but it just all went by so fast. But I suppose that can always be the result of it being more fun, so let's not call that the worst thing about it, especially since the Switch 2 version has now added some additional content to its bones. And instead, for the second time in this video, give the questionable honor to the boss battles. And that has been every game. What do you think the worst things in the mainline Super Mario games are? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. If you really want to support me, you can now become a channel member to get all kinds of fun perks and help me keep bringing these videos to your doorstep every week. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.